Hello, welcome to Palm Music Verse. Been away for a little while, apologies for that, but I'm back with this new video. Let me start out by saying, anyone who knows me knows I'm a big Good Charlotte fan. This video isn't about Good Charlotte per se. If you want a good video on the history of Good Charlotte, go over and watch the Punk Rock MBA's video that was done a few months ago, which is really insightful and a great little walk through their history. What I want to focus on is more the Madden Brothers themselves and their ventures outside of the band. With that said, a tiny bit about my history with the band. I first discovered them in 2000. Someone was slagging them off on the Atari's message board at the time. This was before the days of social media, so that's what we used as social media. But I was intrigued about them, checked out the band, loved it. Got their album on import. I was at the first UK show and I've been a huge fan ever since. So I want to talk about how I feel that the Madden Brothers have always been ahead of the game in the business world. They're great at calling the shots. They've done so much for the music world, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this video.
So you produced their album, their EP, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
First thing I noticed them doing outside of just being in the band was they had that show on MTV called All Things Rock. It seemed like MTV really saw something in them and saw the appeal they had, because you'd see them interviewing movie stars. I remember when the second Lord of the Rings film came out, for example, they had the twins interviewing the several hobbits.
Anything, rock and roll, we're hobbits.
We got to interview.
Yeah, you got to talk about the movie.
One thing Finn McKenty did catch is that the Madden Brothers seem to have been ahead of the curve fashion-wise, because if you're a fan, you'll remember they had made clothing in the early 2000s. It wasn't that unusual for bands, particularly in that world, to start their own clothing brands. But they've kind of been persistent with the clothing element of their careers, because we had, obviously, Made lasted for a while. Then there was DCMA, which kind of came to prominence in sort of around 2008, if I remember correctly. And they had the store just off Melrose on Martel, I think. And you saw a lot of celebrities wearing that around that time. DCMA did kind of peter out a little bit, as far as I'm aware. But they've never really gone away from that world. I know recently they've been involved in a brand called Painted Flowers. Painted Flowers is a collaboration with Tadaki Wakamatsu. I hope I've pronounced that right. They recently had their launch in Los Angeles. So I think it's safe to say that the Maddens are entrepreneurs. So even though they've been involved in lots of ventures, what I really want to focus on is what they've done for the music world. As far as I'm aware, their first foray into music business ventures was DC Flag Records, launched in around 2004. This had some cool artists on. They had Hazen Street, MC Chris. But it wasn't until a decade later that they really cemented themselves onto the artist management side of things, when they released MDDN. MDDN was set up by Benji, Joel, Josh, and their friend Joey Simran. I guess it was really for them to provide guidance to younger artists, the kind of guidance that they wouldn't have had themselves coming up as a band. They've had such an impressive roster. Like, so many of these young artists have gone on to become so huge. Like, they've had Waterparks, who are a huge band in alternative rock music today. They've had Poppy. Poppy's like a sensation. Poppy I actually heard about via Zach Safini, who was on my podcast at the time.
There's one particular artist that I am working with right now and that I have worked with previously that I'm especially excited about. It's a girl named Poppy. Have you guys heard of her?
I think.
And he's someone else they represent, and he's now one of the biggest rock producers in the world. Like, everyone wants to work with him. So they've always had a knack for calling the shots like this. I mean, another example of that is a little throwback to 2011. I remember at the time that Benji and Joel were constantly tweeting about and did a song with a Cleveland young rapper called Machine Gun Kelly. And look what happened to him. He's kind of, like him or not, he's kind of everywhere these days. And as far as I'm aware, and I can remember, and I have a good memory, that it was always via Benji and Joel that I was hearing about him before I started hearing about him everywhere. Also, MDDN hasn't just been finding new artists and helping them rise. It's also been working with established acts like the likes of Anti-Flag, Sleeping with Sirens. In the early days, I know Jessie J was on there, just showing that they were that this is a company that's respected and entrusted by veterans of the game as well, which says a lot.
And we just started talking, and we became really good friends. And somewhere down the line, I was like, you all should just manage us.
Another venture in the music world that's been hugely successful for them is Veeps. Veeps, that I, as far as I'm aware, kind of started life as a sort of VIP package for artists to use for their fans at concerts, and then seemed to morph into like an online platform for live performances.
Hope you guys can tune in because it will be a virtual streaming performance that will go on for 2 days. So make sure to go to veeps.com and buy a ticket.
And with its simplicity, lack of admin fees, it was very user-friendly for artists. So you would see lots and lots of management companies and artists taking it up and using it. I mean, you know, proper huge artists like Jamie Foxx, Louis Tomlinson, and notably that Bob Dylan used it for a performance last year. Doesn't get much bigger than that. Veeps was then bought by Live Nation, really stamping itself on the map and just showing what a huge success it's been. Recently, I've noticed Benji and Joel have been very involved in the world of NFTs, much like their peers. I feel like they were slightly ahead of the game on that one as well. And NFTs, man, you know, they're everywhere at the minute, as you'll probably know. I'm not a huge expert on the subject, so I'm not going to really elaborate on that. But I have put in the description a link to an article on Alt Press that's a good summary of the subject. And on the subject of Alt Press, that's another thing in the music world that the Maddens have been involved with. Not entirely sure how that came about, but I know that Josh Madden now works at Alternative Press, and Benji and Joel are very involved. For example, Joel has a series of YouTube videos for Alt Press where he interviews upcoming bands.
You know what my favorite part of making records used to be? Just listening, just finishing the album and then driving around and listening to it.
Front to back, I loved.
Since they've taken over Alt Press, it's kind of had a rebranding. It was becoming, not to reference the punk rock NBA yet again, but a while back he had a video on how Alt Press was becoming a bit stale. Just the Alt Press that we've known from the Warped Tour scene and the way the magazine was presented in the sort of 2010s up to today. But what he'd missed was this rebranding that had already taken place. And if you look at the kind of artists, I mean, they're still covering the Warped Tour scene, but the kind of artists they cover, it's so diverse, and you're seeing, it's basically, you're not just seeing white men on the front cover of Alt Press anymore. It's really branching out and keeping up, and I feel like the Madden Brothers have a lot to do with that. Yeah, and also they seem to be really respected across the scene. A lot of people speak well of them and have appreciated the work they've done for them. You know, I don't know them personally. I speak to Josh on the phone every now and then. I mean, the band I manage, Love Breakers. I'm a family man, nice to meet you. All three of them have been really supportive of and said kind words about. Josh has given me a lot of advice, so massively appreciate that. But it just, you know, so I've had a small taste of the guidance they offer the music scene. Yeah, so I mean, testament to the Madden Brothers is that they've stayed relevant all these years. They're major players in the music world, just because they've been ahead of the game. They've seen the way things are going. They haven't turned their back on the scene they came from. Like, the more and more famous they've become, and yeah, like they're just such major players, whether you know it or not, in the music world today. Thanks for watching.